Thanks for joining us on the program, everyone. It's exactly 24 hours after former President Muhammadu Buhari was laid to rest in his hometown of Daura. And today, the nation once again paused in solemn remembrance. A fidal prayer was held in his honor, drawing Nigeria's political elite back to Katsina. Vice President Kashim Shettima led the federal delegation alongside Governors Dikko Rada and Babangana Zulum of Katsina and Borno State. Former Vice President Atiku Abubakar, Labour Party's Peter Obi, former Kaduna State Governor Nasir El-Rufai and other dignitaries also joined in prayers. In attendance were former Aviation Minister Hadi Sirika, the former NIA boss Ahmed Rufai and Deputy Governor of Katsina Farouk Jobe, who saw them united, if only for a moment, in grief and in tribute. But beyond the symbolism, the question remains as to how the man will be remembered as the nation watches his final homecoming. We turn our attention tonight to the legacy, the controversies, and the enduring impact of the man who led Nigeria through some of its most defining moments. We're going to flip the lines from the official story we've been covering since Sunday to the journalist who covered him up close. My guest tonight isn't just a reporter. He was there in the briefing rooms, on the tarmac, during those long foreign trips, and in the silence when the nation had questions. Stephen Angbolo is State House correspondent for The Punch newspaper. He joins me live from our Abuja studio. Welcome to Beyond the Headlines.
Thank you so much, Nefemi, for having me.
So you covered the twilight of the Buhari years from 2021 through 2023. What really do you consider the most revealing moments that show these vulnerabilities or strengths as president?
Thank you once again for having me. I would say that if you look at the late President Buhari in full, you will see contrasts, right? There's the unity part, the unity pledge in the beginning of his administration back in 2015. The popular quote where he said, "I belong to everybody and I belong to nobody." And of course, that transitions into, other areas of his administration. We saw structural anti-corruption moves, like the Treasury single account being implemented in full at the time and became operational, just to plug some leakages here and there in the whole of the way government spends its money and receives money. However, you can't also ignore the economic pain of two recessions, right, in 2016 and 2020. There was also the handling of the NSAS protests at the time, and also the eventual ban on Twitter, as we all know. Again, there was also the unforgettable kitchen and the other room remark in Berlin at the time. And also, there were issues around the cabals forming. At the time, the First Lady at the time even making a public complaint in the media to say that her husband's administration had been taken over by what she called people that were not, appointed colleagues, as it were. So you could just see that contrast in the sense that we could say that I belong to nobody, I belong to everybody. And then a few years later, we find out that there's an outcry from within the villa to say that, there's a few people who have,
that he actually belonged to some people unknown to even his wife himself. I get your point. But if you're also paying close attention, Stephen, to the social media, you see some form of division. Some mourning, others are very critical. How do you think history will balance his intentions against the outcomes of his two tenors?
Now, I would say that this reflects the duality of the Buhari administration, right, and his legacy as a president of Nigeria, particularly the one most Nigerians or young Nigerians remember. That's the one from 2015 to 2023. And I believe that he was aware of that duality, which is why in an interview back in 2023, January of 2023 precisely, he said, and I quote, "I have done my best for Nigeria. Whether my best is good enough is for Nigerians to decide." 7 months after his presidency, I remember an interview which aired on NTA at the time that where he said, and I quote, "We were as transparent and accountable as possible, being aware of the fact that posterity will ultimately judge. We kept records of our stewardship, knowing that we would always be required to account for the trust entrusted to us." So there is no doubt that the late president was aware of that duality, and he publicly acknowledged those limitations in his leadership towards the end of his tenure and for the hardship of some of his decisions on Nigerians. So yes, the social media may be split now, but you must also remember that Buhari himself said that posterity will judge him by the record, and I think that is clearly what is at play at the moment.
What is playing out right now?
The citizenry. What's playing out right now is the citizens taking from the records of what he did as a president and then putting it out there and judging it based on the merit of what he did and how it affected them as individuals, not just as political appointees or civil servants or whatever, how it reached down to the very, very grassroots of the nation.
Stephen, let's talk about his relationship with the press, because the Punch, which you work for, at the time addressed him solely as Major General, even as a democratically elected president. What was the protest about at the time? Was there a time that the Punch as an organization, wasn't allowed to cover events at the State House? Well,
I would say those were pretty. That period, the episode in 2017 was a pretty ugly incident. Although I was nowhere close to the activities at the time, but I got very good briefing and stories of what happened at the time from the horse's mouth himself, my predecessor, Mr. Attahiru at the time. And it just went on to tell that there's, even in the relationship, as much as there is a rhetoric on the side in the administration at the time that there is press freedom and all of that, realities on the ground was far from perfect. The editorial decision by the Punch at the time to name him Major General, taking him back to his military roots. That was in December of 2019. It was not made lightly. That decision was not made lightly, I must say. It was a deliberate act of institutional protest against what the newspaper perceived as creeping authoritarianism in the guise of democracy, right? And at the heart of it was a consistent disregard for court orders. I think that was the major issue that brought up that conversation at the time. Court orders in the cases where Omoyele Sowore and Sambo Dasuki, former National Security Advisor, who had been granted bail at the time but were still kept in custody, despite that the court had granted them bail. So the editorial board felt that the constitutional principles of the rule of law and separation of powers were being subverted at the time. And, so referring to the former president as Major General Muhammadu Buhari, retired at the time, and his government as a regime was a way of reminding the public and the presidency at the time that military style had no place in a constitutional democracy. It was journalistic dissent at play, right, rooted in democratic tradition. And to be clear, it was not a personal insult on the person of the president, as it were. It was simply a critique of style, not necessarily the office. That's the way
I think, like the president said, that history is going to justify. I think that there are also going to be some other people who have a completely or slight different narrative as to what transpired. I know beyond the court orders, there were petitions, I believe, that were written at the time. But let's talk about some concerns, Stephen, about how his death in a London hospital has again popularized medical tourism. Recall that former President Yar'Adua was also treated in the United Arab Emirates. You did a story recently about the number of foreign trips the current president has made in 2 years. How important do you think this is for Nigerians?
First, I would say that the usefulness and the dividend of a foreign trip is based on two factors. Number one is the clarity of the goals for each trip, and the quality of the agreements and the deals signed after that trip, or during that trip now. And second would be the level and the zest of follow-through with those agreements and with those gains that were signed or that were gotten during those trips. It goes to say that the presidency is a highly ambassadorial role. That is one thing I would want us to take out of this conversation. So most likely you will find that the president goes out, travels a lot to represent the interests of the country in places in, faraway lands. The issue of medical tourism, it's historical, I would say, because we can trace it back not just from the Yar'Adua administration, even as far back as before the dawn of democracy. It's just that we don't have full-fledged documentation, as it were, for those kind of trips now. So it goes way back, and we've seen it as more like a legacy thing, where we have heads of states and Nigerian heads of states and presidents taking trips solely for medical reasons out of the country. And I remember that the last administration defended that, saying that the former president had his doctors back in London, and the places where he went to in London for those medical checkups, they had his medical history long before he came into office, right? But some would say that, after that, why don't we have, stable structures on the ground to cater to these kinds of issues? But again, in the last administration, if you remember, the Buhari administration constructed the presidential wing of the State House Medical Center. And I remember that at the time, the president said that there will be no more need, I'm quoting verbatim now, there will be no more need for Nigerian heads of state to embark on foreign trips for the purpose of medical issues. Indeed. But as it were, again, it still plays out that, like the reason given in the last administration, it may be still suffice now. Some might still say, because I've seen it on social media and I've seen some of the rhetoric around that, to say that, hey, long before this person became president, this is where he had been taking his, medical leave. This is where he goes for checkups and all of that. And why would we want to change that now that he's public property?
Yeah, Stephen, there are two ways.
Or public citizen, rather.
There are actually two ways to look at it. On one hand is whether or not we have, a working medical system and infrastructure on ground that can cater to any form of illness at any level, right? The other angle is patriotism. Absolutely. I remember speaking with someone during the state funeral coverage yesterday who made mention of Fidel Castro, who chose to receive treatment only in Cuba, even during his final illnesses. There are concerns from Nigerians as to whether or not leaders should, whether we should have legislation that compel our leaders to send their children to our schools, to have them, get treated in our hospitals, and then to also restrict them to the four walls of Nigeria. Perhaps that will really improve the quality of service that Nigerians also can get to. But that's an interesting conversation. I think that we'll talk more about it shortly. But you and your colleague have run an article where you talked about some favorite, what you call your 50 favorite quotes from the former president, ranging from bedroom-centric jokes about his wife, you mentioned earlier, to firm anti-corruption lines. Which of these quotes do you think truly captured his persona, and which ones surprised you as a journalist?
The one that captured, I would say, captured his persona and his thinking on certain very touchy subjects was the one he said in Berlin, and that was in April of 2018. I remember correctly, where he said he was asked about concerns raised by his wife. I think it was a journalist there at the press briefing with the former German Chancellor, Angela Merkel, and the response was that he doesn't know the political party that his wife belongs to, but that he knows that she belongs to his kitchen, his bedroom, and then the other room and all. So it gave it was a sharp contrast, right, to the rhetoric that the administration had pushed out consistently over time, that there would be prioritization of women in the government and all of that. And at home, we see that the first lady, or the closest woman in the life of the president at the time, practically had no role. So it was more like a situation of charity not beginning at home after all, right? And so that gave an idea of his stance on those kinds of issues. And I would say that quote was one of those that shocked me the most. The second one would be the one where that could be interpreted as Nigerian youths not being ready, unwilling to work or put in the work.
And that got many young Nigerians angry with him, Stephen.
Absolutely. I mean, I can tell you for free that being a youth, I was working on that statement that evening at the office, and I looked at it. I had to take one hard look again. I was like, but I'm a youth. I mean, I cannot define myself as not willing to work. All right. You know, and that didn't go down well with
Stephen, we've completely run out of time. What an interesting conversation it's been. I believe that we'll talk more about this subsequently. Stephen Angulu is State House correspondent for the Punch newspaper. Thank you so much for talking to us.
It's a pleasure.
Well, in part two of our conversation, if the morning in Daura marked the end of one political era, the man who sat quietly among the dignitaries at today's Fidel prayer may have just signaled the beginning of another. Former Vice President Atiku Abubakar, fresh from paying his last respects to Muhammadu Buhari in Daura, returned to the headlines, this time not for reflection but for defection, well, so to speak. In a letter dated Monday, July 14th, and addressed to the PDP chairman in his Jeddah Ward 1, Adamawa State, Nigeria's former #2 man officially resigned from the People's Democratic Party, a party he once helped shape and twice ran on as its presidential flag bearer. He called it heartbreaking, and he said the PDP has lost its way, straying far from the ideals on which it was founded. Well, let's bring in someone who knows better and who has also worked with him very closely, Special Assistant on Public Communication to Atiku Abubakar. We're joined by Frank Shuaibu. Mr. Shuaibu, thank you so much for joining us on the program this evening. Let's begin with the obvious question. Why now? What was the tipping point that made the former Vice President walk away from the PDP?
Well, it depends on the noun that is in the context of your question. If it is the noun based on why leaving the PDP at this time, I would want to say that you and I know that the PDP has grossly deviated from the ideals and the reality of the previous opposition party. So the crisis in the party began long before it lost power in 2015 presidential election. But you know that after the loss in 2015, there was a serious agitation calling on Atiku to return to the party with the promise that all the issues that stultify the party will be resolved. Unfortunately, the crisis remained unabated. So it is not about now. The crisis had been there, and some even said that he was the problem. So I think it's best for us that he left at this time, so that maybe the PDP, in the interest of internal democracy, in the interest of democracy, the PDP will find his footing and see if he is the problem, why not leave, so that we can see if the PDP can resolve its problem.
I hear you, Mr. Shaibu, but this isn't the first exit from the PDP. Critics say that Atiku Abubakar's pattern of switching parties undermines political stability. How do you respond to those who say this move is opportunistic ahead of 2027?
It is preposterous for anybody to contextualize that. Politics is about moving. Politics is about realignment and re-strategizing. So Atiku Abubakar is not the only politician who has switched political parties, who has defected from one political party to the other. In the instance, he has only said that he has withdrawn his membership of the PDP. He has not said, "Oh, I'm joining this party for XYZ reason." That's not the issue. So it is when he says it's not the first time he is switching parties. He is not the first person to switch parties in the context of the Nigerian political lexicography. So he is not the first, and he won't be the last. The important thing is that, look, some persons, particularly using the instrumentality of state power, have been at the forefront of the destabilization of the party. So if he has chosen to exit the party at this time, I don't think anything is wrong with that.
You know that he stands out for the number of times he's run since 1993, about six attempts to, run for president of Nigeria, and we're also following closely his connection with the newly formed coalition party, the ADC. Can you confirm whether Atiku Abubakar will contest again in 2027, or is he now playing the role of a kingmaker?
That is not what you just reported that he was at the third day prayer of President Muhammadu Buhari. It's too early in the day for us to begin to discuss politics or begin to talk about whether he's going to run in 2027 or not. The issue is he has left the PDP for those who believe that he is the problem of the PDP, for them to see that they can enjoy the carcass of what is left of the party. So it is not about running. It shouldn't be about contesting election. Then the other assumption or presumption you made, I'm not sure. I don't know how old you were in 1993, but I'm sure that you should know for sure that in 1993 there was no PDP. He was in the SDP. There was the SDP and the NRC. There were the two major parties at that time, and he was of the SDP. And he did step down for late MQ Abiola at that time. So it is not about whether he has moved from one party to the other. So if SDP at that time went into oblivion and PDP was formed in 1999, and PDP was formed and he became a vice president in 1999, he was elected on that platform. You should know that when you want to count about switching of parties, you don't begin to go back.
I hear you, Mr. Shaibu, and I hope that you also
elections in 1993.
I hope that you also paid attention to my submission. I don't have to be alive in 1993 to know what happened there. I was talking about this attempt at the presidency, which is now about 6 times, precisely the point I made there. But you talked about the timing. Just a minute, Mr. Shaibu, because of our time. You talked about the timing. The political conversation is rife. I mean, that's exactly what the coalition is talking about, rescuing the nation and getting a viable alternative for the ruling APC. So the timing, according to the vibe we're getting from the ADC, it's rife. They have started that conversation, and as a matter of fact, it is quite political. The big question has always been, do you think Mr. Atiku Abubakar will be able to step down for the likes of Peter Obi ahead of 2027?
I do not understand. You see, I don't understand this postulation, particularly coming from maybe professional journalists. The question is, what is happening in 2027? And the vibe is not coming from the ADC. The vibe is from the ruling party, who has failed on all ramifications and have abandoned governance for politics. So the vibe is from them. They are the ones who have brought the vibe about politicking for 2027. So let me correct that impression in the first place. And of course, they have to get the response from the ADC, because we cannot operate, allow them to have always wanted to operate with a one-party state, or having only the APC, run the show in 2027. And that is why what brought about the emergence of the ADC. Now, I think it's uncharitable for you to even begin to discuss who will step down for who and who will do what or who will not do what. For us, it's about, if you say that you are aware that the ADC is talking about rescuing Nigeria from the shackles of the maladministration, of the current administration, then by the current administration, then you should understand that it is too early in the day to discuss who is running and who will pick the ticket.
All right. Well, the countdown is on, Mr. Shuaibu. You know, political stakeholders might choose to shy away from these questions, but we'll eventually get there. And time will tell how these play out in the coming days. But a big thank you to Mr. Philip Shuaibu, who is Special Assistant to Mr. Frank Shuaibu, I beg your pardon, who is Special Assistant to Atiku Abubakar on Public Communication. Thank you so much for talking to us. That's our show today, everyone. Remember, you can watch it again at midnight and at 6 a.m. tomorrow. I am Nifemi Oguntoye.